What's going on, everybody? James here from Artofficial Entertainment, and today I'm going to show you how to set up the transition action system for climbing state actions inside of the Dynamic Parkour Trace System, version 3. So let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, so in the last video we had talked about climb jumping actions, but now we're going to talk about the climb transition actions. Now these would be used for things like vaulting or mantling on or over a climb area. So for example, if you were on something like this and wanted to vault over it, or you were way up here and on this and wanted to vault on or mantle on top of it. Now, it also includes things like corners, also dropping down from a beam walk to a hang, going up from a hang to a beam walk. So basically anything that's going to be a transition from one type to another when you're already on the climb area. So basically it's going to be without changing your climb area. So again, vaults, mantles, corners, dropping down to a hang, climbing up to a full contact on the beams. So these are going to be primarily what you're going to use the transition system for. And realistically, it's all pretty straightforward and it's very similar to the climbing jump system. So let's go ahead and start setting up some of the basic stuff. So if we go into our third person, blueprints, VP third person character, go find some space here. And then under interfaces, action events, we're going to go ahead and get the climb transition action event here. Grab our parkour system reference here, just duplicate it from up here. And then I'm going to pull off and just type in anim selection. And we're going to get the climb transition anim selector. Now the compare values, we'll just pull off, type in make array. And the value I'm going to use for these is just going to be length, because I don't really need any other value, at least from my experience. But as always, you can use as many or as little values as you want. But the length here is going to give me a nice value to choose between vaulting and mantling. And otherwise, I can just let the state selector control the rest. Now, with the transition action selector in, we're just going to go to our parkour system here, go over to the system, secondary settings, allowed actions, and make sure climb transition is checked. Now from here, we're going to go compile and save, and we're going to talk a little bit about the climb transition selector. So we're going to go into the DPTS assets, selection tables from climb, and open up where it says climb transition selection table. Now, if we add a row into our index here and then add an element and open this up, it's probably all starting to look very familiar by now. But if we open up the action modifications here, you're going to see that we have the input restriction, state match options, custom bool mods, but we also have this primary modification option. So unlike the other ones that had a primary modifier where you could match two, this one only has a single match value. So if we look at the drop down here for the primary modification listing, we have corner, inner right and left, outer right and left, and then disengage from state. So if you guys remember from the climb setup video, we had set up the ability to disengage from a climb state whenever we press the left alt key. But we have it set up so where it's not using an animation. And if we wanted to set up the animation, we would just need to check this box. And then in the transition action, whatever we're going to be using for a drop, we would just want to make sure that that disengage from state is set as the modifier. Now, outside of that, you can see we also have the input restrictions. This helps control corners and directions of certain transitional actions you might want to do. And then under the state match restriction, just like with the climbing jump actions, we have the target and as well as an active we can match and compare to. So let's go ahead and actually set up a simple vault and mantle action to be able to use when we're in climbing states. Alright, so we'll start with the simple vault. If I go to climbing and then go to transitions here for my folder, and then for ledge, I do have some animations here that I've just, put off to the side so that way they were ready. Now for the vault, we're going to use this one. So you can see he starts in the full contact, pulls himself up, and then vaults over. So I'm going to go in. I actually have this as a montage already for both the mantle and the vault. So this is going to be our mantle here, where he's going to kind of climb up and just go on to. And this one's going to go up and over. So with the vaulting animation here, what we're going to do is just like we always do with the enable auto blend out uncheck, add a few notified tracks to our animation here. And then we're going to right click, add notify state, motion warp with offset. And we're going to go and kind of look at where he gets to a plant, which I'd say would be right about there. So we want to look at where he's kind of going to be going on top of the object and getting a nice alignment. Now, one thing to note though, is that when you're setting up like vaults or mantles or transitional actions in general, you're going to want to actually, instead of using height, in this instance, we're going to go to the root motion modifier and we're going to use active target as where we're going to start. And the reasoning for this is that when we use the active target, this allows us to start from wherever we currently are and then pull ourselves up from that location. So if we go and uncheck ignore z-axes, keeping warp rotation checked, primary offsets. We'll keep to actor because from here the actor is already aligned, right? We're kind of climbing up and going over, so we're just going to keep our default alignment. But we'll go ahead and set our offsets, and we'll move the character back by about maybe 46. Now you'll notice I'm not using the state warp overrides because of the fact that his override position is going to be really to get to here, not to here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is right click, add notify, and we're going to go ahead and find a land target because in this instance, as I had said, we're going to be vaulting over the item. So we want to see if there's a possibility for us to find a land target. Now the search start is going to be length. And the reasoning is that when you're doing a transition, like so for example, over something like this, you will be able to get a length target that will be supplied to you to be able to use. So we can go for length as the starting position. And, you know, anytime we've used length for our land target, we're going to go ahead and push it forward 20 units. Now the Z search distance, I'm going to set this one to be maybe around 250. With the forward position search, we'll set between 90 and 200. And then we'll right click, add notify state, motion warp with offset. Now we'll look at where it kind of goes off of the actor item. So we're using a lot of the same stuff we used for vaults in the other video, where we're kind of assigning land targets and going over the actor, and because we're starting in a climbing state, but we're not going to be ending in one in this instance. So we're going to go and just get the root motion modifier here. We're going to set the target to land, and the ignore Z axes we're going to uncheck, and this time we are going to uncheck warp rotation as well. And then we'll just right click, add notify, and then reset parkour action. Now we'll set the blend time to 0.2. And now because we're not going to be going back into a state at the end of this animation, we're not going to make sure to check the activate state under the state control options. We're just going to leave that blank this time. So now what we've done, just to recap really quick, is that we're going up using our active target inside of the root motion modifier here, finding a land target from the other side of the object that we found, and then we're going to use the root motion to go over, and then we're going to use that land target here to be able to go into sort of like an ending point. With this, I do recommend if we go into the reset parkour action options here, under advanced options, make sure that blend velocity on impact fail is checked, and that's that option that allows you to make sure that if it doesn't find a target, it'll make a nice smooth transition drop regardless. So now with this setup, what we'll do is we're going to go into our DPTS assets folder, selection tables, from climb, and open up the climb transition selection table. Now we have this index here from when we were taking a look at things, so we'll actually just go ahead and use this one. And then I'll add from the montage index, and I'll just type in ledge and then vault, and we'll see the safety vault right here that we just set up. In the character, we only set it up, or at least I only set mine up, to be able to compare against the length. So that's really all I care about. So if I go back to the transition selector, add one single compare value, I'm going to use the same type of setup I did for my other vaults that are non-climbing based. So a minimum of 10, maximum of 50. Now I'm not going to use any modifications here, but I am going to set an input restriction of forward, and this is not necessarily vital, but it's something that I like to do. And now we'll go ahead and set the state match restriction. Target's going to be blank, but active we'll set to whatever we want to choose this for. So in this case, we have a full contact sort of starting position here. So if we look, we can see all four, both the hands and the feet are on the ledge. So if I go back to the selector here, I know that I want to make sure that my active type is going to be either ledge climb full contact or point climb full contact, and then save. Now you don't have to do, this setup exactly. I'm just, showing you guys an example, obviously. Now with this setup here though, what we can do is I'll go ahead and I'll just grab a new cube for us to be able to play on, and I'll just make it a little wider, taller, just like that. All right, so then we'll just make sure to add the tag here. So we'll go under the actor tag, add two elements here. First one is going to be climb, and the second one we'll just set to ledge for right now. Now, one thing just to make sure of is I'm going to go ahead and just make a copy of it. I'm going to make a smaller one because this one we'll use for our mantle, but we did just make a vault, right? So we want to make sure it's not as wide. So we'll go over to the thinner object here, climb up on top of it. Now, if I press W and the space bar, you can see that he does a vault over. Now, we could probably make that, that landing a little bit smoother, with a retime and stuff, but realistically, that's working out pretty well. He's climbing over and landing. And to set up the mantle version, it's pretty much the exact same thing. If we go into my transitions here, and we go up to the ledge ones, montages, and then I'm going to look at the climb up monkey montage here, and then we'll just add a couple notify tracks, uncheck the enable auto blend out, right click, add notify state, and then motion warp with offset. And just like what we did before, we're going to make it so that way the root motion modifier is going to be our active target, so where we are currently. And then we're going to uncheck ignore z-axes, keeping warp rotation checked, but we'll leave the actor as the orientation here. And then for offsets, we'll just make sure that the forward offset is -46. And we'll look at where he goes down into a nice plant position, which I'd say right there would be good. Now underneath this here, we're going to right click, add notify state, and then we're going to find land target. Because again, just like with the vault, we want to find a spot for our character to go on to. So now just like with all the other mantle types, rather than using length, we're going to use the height point. But in this case, it's actually going to be the active target. And then if we go into the search start offsets, we'll set the up value to about 20. The land search Z distance we'll set to 60. And the forward position search, we're just going to say between 20 and we'll say 90. Sure, why not? And then if I right click, add notify state, motion warp with offset, and then we'll go ahead and just use this window here to get our character to the landing point. So now we can go into the root motion modifier here, type in land, uncheck ignore z-axes, uncheck warp rotation, and then right click, add notify, and then we'll just add the reset parkour action with a blend time set to 0.2. So now we can save this, and there we go. Now we have a mantle. So if we go back into our transition selector, we can add another row into here, and then we'll add our montage into here. So we'll add the monkey climb up here. Now add the compare value here, and again, we're using length. So for this one, I'm going to use between 50 and 350. Now under the modification, I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to be looking for forward as my input restriction. State max restriction is going to be target is going to be set to just none. And then for the active here, we're going to set this to the same values we did before, where it's ledge climb full contact or point climb full contact. Now you could also use these with free climbing as well if you would like. But generally speaking, the free climb stuff is literally the exact same. That's why I'm not showing it too much here. If we now go over to this object, play from here, climb up on it, and then I hit W and space, now we are climbed up on top of it. So there we go. So now we can climb up on this, and then we can vault over it. Then we can also climb up on this and get on top of it. So now let's start talking about corners a little bit. And there's some setup stuff we're going to do before we actually set up the corner animations themselves. So we're going to go to our character. For me, it's third person blueprints, BP third person character. And we're going to go to the dynamic parkour tray system and go into the details panel here on the side. Now, when it comes to corners, there are two main values that we want to focus on here in the settings for the details. The first one is going to be the corner search state match. These are going to be the allowed state types that we're going to do corners from. So in this case, it's defaulted to ledge climb full contact, ledge climb hang, and balance beam hang. But if it's not in this listing, like with some of the others, it's not going to occur. So it's very important that we make sure to have whatever you want to have corners trigger on is in this listing, and you can add or remove elements very easily. And the second item that we want to make sure is going to be the auto corner. Now, I'm going to check this for the first set of examples, but basically what this does is that if we're moving along and we have corners set up, so if I go over to this area here and I just climb on top of it and I move to the left, you can see that we have some corners targets being shown there. Now, the reason why my FPS just dropped is because of the fact that the targets on the corners are being displayed every frame. And that'll be something that by the time you guys get the system, this will be not an issue. So don't worry about that. But as you can see, we have 2 points. We have the red and the yellow, which is the initial and the height. So if I look at this again, you can see we got that. Now the auto corner is basically going to, whenever we get to the edge, it's going to automatically trace for a possible corner point. So you can see in this instance, it just did the same thing. So the other way we can trigger corners though, is if we uncheck this, minimize, press play, and we go over to this object here, and I climb all on top of it. And if I go to the left, you can see nothing happens. But if I press the left and space, now something happens. If I press right and space, something happens. So this is where you can assign the corners to be triggered based off of an input, or we can automatically trigger them once we get to an end. Now, outside of just being able to assign how corners are going to be taken, we can also assign the distance for the corner as well. So I'm going to compile save, and we're going to go to our settings. So in our content, we're going to go DPTS assets, selection tables, settings, and the DPTS selections, our settings selection table. Now under the from climb state here, we're going to open up under option 0 here because we're going to be focusing on the one that's used for ledge climb and full contact. And we're going to open up under the secondary use settings. Now you're going to see here we have a corner target distance. Right now it's set to 30, but if I set this to something like 50, or we'll set it to 80 actually, something a little bit more marginally noticeable. And if I go over to the corner here and I go up and I go here, you can see that that yellow, that height target point is now much farther away. So you can set this to be however distance, whatever distance you want the corner to be targeted at. So just make sure that you play around with this value to whatever and make it to something you're going to be happy with. And just to reiterate as well, inside of the settings here, each one of these different match types, so index 1, we have a state match type of ledge climb hang, and ledge climb hang also has its own corner space settings. So we can adjust this based off of climb type very easily just by looking at the different index values under the from climb state settings. Now let's go ahead and let's start setting up a corner animation. So if I go to my climbing folder here and open up the transitions, ledge, you can see that we have some corners inner and outer. Now one thing to note that in my version of the system anyways, this might change based off of the animation pack, but just so you know for the purposes of naming conventions, for me what I would consider a corner inner versus outer, if I take a duplicate here just to make two different corner situations, to me this is inner, this is outer. So some of your animations might not be named that way, like for example, for this one we have corner inner, but it does what I would consider to be the outer transition type. So just something to point out, when you're going around the outside of an actor, it's outer, but when you're going inside between two actors, it's going to be inside. So with that knowledge in mind, we'll go ahead and we'll take the corner inner, left and right. We're going to right click and create the anim montage versions of them, and we're going to put them into our folder here. And we'll start off with the corner left. Now, as I had pointed out earlier, we have the initial point as well as a height point that we can use. Now, the reason why I supplied the additional point is because you can see here, he actually goes and tries to attach to that point. So what we can do is use that for that particular attachment. So if we go to notify state, retime error. So if we go to notify state, motion warp with offset, and we look at where he kind of grabs onto that corner point, we can use this window, if we go into the root motion modifier, to assign the initial uncheck ignore z-axes and warp rotation. Now for this particular section of these animations, I don't recommend using the state warp overrides. We're going to go into the primary offsets, and I'm just going to set sort of arbitrary closely matching values. So like for example, normally this would be -46, but I'm actually going to set this to -50. Normally this would be -125. I'm just going to set it to -120. Now, because we are also bringing him over, so if you can see here, we're going from here and going over here. So we actually want to bring him maybe to the left, -40 units. Now you'll see why we're doing this when we actually trigger the animation. But the next thing we're going to do is look at where he kind of starts to pivot around. So we'll say right about here. And then if we right click, add notify state, and then we're going to go with the motion warp with offset, and then we're going to look at where he does his plant. So we'll say right about here. Now we're going to uncheck ignore z-axes, keeping warp rotation checked. Go up into the primary offsets, make sure that the orientation is set to primary target normal. The warp target name is going to be set to height, and we're going to make sure that this time use state warp overrides is checked. Now we're just going to uncheck the enable auto blend down, go to the end here, add notify, reset parkour action, make sure that our blend time is set to something around 0.2, but use whatever feels comfortable for you. And then under the state control options, make sure that activate state is set to true. And then we'll save. And now if we go back into our climb transition selection, we'll add another element into here. And then we'll put that montage that we just made, the corner montage here. And for the compare values, we'll add a value in, but we'll leave it blank. And then we'll open up the action modifications here. So what we're going to do is the primary modification. So this one is technically ledge corner outer left. So we're going to go with outer left corner. Right there is the option. And then I like to also make it so the input matches just as a secondary set of security. Now for the state match restriction, we can take the target and the active and set them the same, but we can also just make it so the active is the only thing checked. It's entirely up to you. If you want to use corners to be able to get to other types of climbing, you can go ahead and just set the target to none, or we can go ahead and set ledge climb full contact, add another value in here, and point climb full contact, or actually no, we'll leave it at just ledge climb, because then we can just do this, and this way and then we can just go up to the index for target, and we can set it to the same. So it's entirely up to you if you want to make it so that way it's a direct match to match, or it can just be open-ended for the target to use the corners to transition to other climb types. Now, if we save, minimize, we'll take the secondary one out, and we'll go ahead and play from here. Now, if I go and just keep going to the left, you can see that we just did the corner transition. Now, if I slow this down during the motion, you can see that here he's grabbing onto that corner point, and then he's going into his full transition. Now, the thing to note is that those offsets that we created, he's pulling himself in a little bit and pulling himself up, which is why these offsets being slightly offset from what their original values are actually work. Now, if we go back to the right one here, we'll set this one up now. So again, we're just going to add a couple notify tracks, right click, notify state, and then we'll get the motion warp with offset, and then just look at where he gets to the corner. So something like that, go ahead and set that window, root motion modifier, warp target name is just going to be initial, and then ignore z-axis uncheck, warp rotation is going to be unchecked, primary offsets, and we'll set the forward offset to -50, up offset to -120, and then we'll just scrub through when he does a little bit of kind of a pivot here. And then we'll right click, add notify state, motion warp with offset, and we'll look at where he gets his kind of attachment back to a surface. So we'll say right about there looks about right. And then uncheck ignore z-axis, keeping warp rotation checked. Warp target name on this one's going to be height. And then orientation use, we're going to set to the primary target normal. And then just make sure use state warp overrides is checked. And then at the end here, add notify, reset parkour action, setting the blend time and the details to 0.2, opening up the state control options, and then just activate state. Now we'll make sure enable auto blend out is just turned off over here, and then we'll save. So now if we go back to our transition selector, so I go to the DPTS asset selections from climb and then the climb transition. Now I'm going to add an element into here, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to shift right click on this index for this other corner and shift left click because I'm only going to change a couple of things on this. So if we open up the action modifications, the first thing is we want to change it from outer left to outer right and the input from left to right. And then on the montage selection here, we're going to change this from the corner inner L to the corner inner R. And there we go. That's it. That's all we needed to do. So now we can go ahead and play, which I'll actually play closer to the target over there. So we'll go over here and then right click play from here. Now if I go up on the actor here, we can now go around to the left and do a corner, but we should be able to now also go around to the right. But that one, I feel like I misspelled something, didn't I? Yes, I did. All right, so INITIAL, initial. Helps when you spell things correctly, doesn't it? So we'll go ahead and now we play from here, and I'll just go right to the right side here. There we go. Now there's one thing I didn't do on this animation purposefully, so that way I can show you. If you look on the left side here, he's doing it that perfect kind of adjustment. But if we go to the right, he's not really going to that corner section, and the reason for that is that we didn't actually give that right offset in the primary offsets. So if we go into the primary offsets, and then for the right, we can set the value to 40. So for the lefts and rights, I kind of recommend just setting it so if it's a right corner, positive value. If it's a left corner, negative value, because right is positive, left is negative. So now we can go back and do the same thing here, climb up on this, go around, and all right, left works perfectly, and now so does right. And the principles that I'm showing here is literally the exact same thing for inner versus outer, as well as doing, hang variations and stuff. And where there's a lot of different types of corner animations you can use, I'm not really going to take a whole lot of time and set them all up here on screen, because the principles that I just showed you, where we're using the initial and the height, kind of adjusting things, this is going to be pretty much the exact same thing you're going to do for every other action when it comes to corners anyways, specifically. Now another type of action we could do using the transition system is going from a beam walk down to a hang type of action. Now if I look into my climbing transitions folder here, and I pull up under the beam, you can see we have this drop L and drop R. So we can see it starts from a balance beam type of stance and then just drops down into a hanging state. And we can use these to be able to go from a balance beam full contact to a balance beam hang very easily. So I'm going to right click, new folder, just make a quick montages folder. And then I'm going to take both of these, both the left and right, and we're going to create montages and throw them right into the folder here. Now, one thing I did notice with these animations is that it says drop left, drop right, but they're actually kind of reversed. So something just to keep in mind is that you can see that even though it says drop left, this is actually dropping to the right side. So Just keep in mind as to which side your character is actually dropping on, just to make sure you can match things accordingly. Now, what we're going to do though is we'll go and add a new track in the notifies track, also making sure to uncheck the enable auto blend out. And then we're going to right click add notifies state with the motion warp with offset. Now we're going to look at when his feet actually leaves the area, which is going to be right after this frame here, after frame 5. And then we'll look at when he actually gets his full attach. So we're just going to use one single notify for this one. So I think right about there would be good. And we'll set the warp target name to height. Ignore z-axis unchecked, keeping warp rotation checked. And orientation we're going to set to the primary target normal, and making sure use state warp overrides is checked. Now from here we'll scrub through. We can see he swings forward a little bit, so we don't want to lose that, but maybe right about here would be a good spot to blend out. So right click, add notify, and then we'll reset parkour action. Blend time 0.2, open up the state control options and make sure activate state is set to true. And then we'll compile and save and go back to our climb transitions, and we'll add in another row. Now this one here will be that montage we just set up with the left. So we're going to go from a balance beam full contact to a balance beam hang. But like I said, even though it says left, it's dropping off to the right side. So what we want to do is take the input restriction and probably set it to the right, because we're going to have one for the right side and one for the left side. Now, just for clarification here, this is just because my animations have a left and right side variant. If yours don't, you don't have to set this up. But there is going to be a side on the left and right that can be utilized for the animations. So if we go into the state match restriction now though, open up a target and an active type. Now our target from here is going to be balance beam hang, and our active is going to be balance beam full. And then we'll take a compare value, just add it in, but we'll leave it blank. All right, and then if we go ahead and save, and I'm going to take out the second beam here, and we'll play from right here. Now if I go on to here, and I press left on my keyboard, right, you can see that he just drops down into a hang state. But now from here, how do we get back up so that way we can be walking again? Which I'll show you that here in just a moment. We're going to go ahead and set up the right side real quick first though. I almost forgot to set up the other side. So we'll go ahead and just add a notify track, right click, notify state, and then motion warp with offset, bringing it to where the jump off starts, looking at where the motion ends. And then under the root motion modifier here, we'll set the target to height, ignore z-axis uncheck. Primary offsets, we're going to set the orientation used to primary target normal. Make sure that state warp overrides is checked, and making sure that enable auto blend out is unchecked. Now we'll go ahead and just scrub forward right about there, right click, add notify, and then reset parkour action. And then in the details panel here, just like always, set a blend time of around 0.2, and then the state control options, activate state. So what we'll do is we'll just copy the values from this index here. So if we hold shift and right click on index 4 and then shift left click on index 5, we'll be able to copy a lot of the values. So this way we can just change right to left and then change this animation from the left to the right version. And now just to show you, if we go back over here, so we had the one where we could drop this way, but now we can also drop to the other side as well if I press the left key. And there we go. So now we have the ability to drop down from climb areas. So let's go ahead and set up the climb back up. So if we go into my transitions, this one's going to be from hang, and I have this climb up here. Now, something to note is that the system is automatically going to set a direction that's going to be sort of like the best matching length direction. So if we're hanging, so if I go just play from here, put myself in a hang. If I go over to here and try to climb up, the system is going to tell me that this direction to my left is the length, like the most length on the object. And it's going to try to face me in that direction. However, if I go to the other side and make it in reverse, obviously it's going to be in reverse. So the system is going to try to put you in a direction that aligns with the length. So what this means is that we can use one animation to be able to actually have them climb up and let the system's direction handle the rest. So you can see in this case, it's technically the climb up left. He's kind of going to the left side, but thanks to the root motion being in place, it really doesn't affect much. So we can take this climb up, right click, create the anim montage, then we'll open it up. Add a notify track, right click, notify state, motion warp with offset, And we'll look at where he actually starts to drop out, which is going to be probably right about there. Now, if we go ahead and just scrub forward here, we're going to look at where his hands stop moving, which is right about there. And now what we're going to do with this one is we're going to go under the root motion modifier, set this one to active target, and then ignore z-axis uncheck and warp rotation uncheck. And then we're going to go into the primary offsets, and this time we're just going to make it so that way the forward offset is whatever this hanging is going to be. So in this case, I have it set to -10. Now from here, we're going to right click, add notify state, motion warp with offset. And we're going to look at where he gets into the plant, which I'd say would be right, probably about here-ish. And then this one's going to be the height. Ignore z-axis uncheck, warp rotation is going to stay checked, and the orientation is going to be the primary target normal. And then we'll check the use state warp overrides, and then save. Now, just real quick, we'll add notify reset parkour action, and move it forward maybe just a smidge. Set the blend time to 0.2, state control options, activate state, and then making sure enable auto blend out is unchecked. So we'll save that, go back into our transition selector, and then add another index. Now we'll open this up. Under the compare values, we'll just add a value, leave it blank, action modifications here. Now for this one, I'm going to set the input restriction to be forward. State match restriction, target, and active is going to be just like how we did before, but in reverse. So our target this time is going to be balance beam full contact, and our active, is going to be balance beam hang. And then we're going to go into the montage selection here, and go ahead and get the hanging climb up here, and then we'll go ahead and save. And now, if we play from here, and we go to the balance beam here, we can drop down. And now if I press W and spacebar, you can see that we also now climb up. And just like I said, it's going to try to find the most matching direction for us to go into. So now we can drop down, we can climb up, we can move across the beam, and we can also end it when we reach the end. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that I took these, the other beam targets out of here because of the fact that you probably saw that the climb search was still happening. So if I go and I add this actor back in, go over to here, and I hit A or to the left and press the space bar, you can see that it's going to do the jump, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what if I wanted to do a transition instead of a climb jump? Well, pretty easy to do. We're going to go into our character, third person blueprint BP third person character for me, and choose an input. For me, I'm liking the left control as one of our main modifiers, so I'm going to keep using this. And then we're going to grab our parkour system, or any reference to it, pull off, and we're going to type in state action search priority. We're going to want to make sure to get the set node. Boom. So we get the in state action search priority. Now, as always, we're going to get 2 of these, so we can use one to set a value and the other to reset said value. And as you can see here, we have the options for jump action and then transition action. And if we open up the dynamic parkour trace system here as well, open up under the secondary settings, or I'm sorry, under the overrides here, you're going to see this option here. So right now by default, it's set to jump action. However, if a jump action is not found, it will try to find a transition instead. But what if you just wanted to do a transition? Well, what we can do is make it so that way the system is going to look for the transition only if we don't have this key pressed. But if we do, then we're going to set it to the transition action as a priority. So if I compile save, go ahead and hit play, and I go back to this area, if I press Control A in space, you can see that now we're doing the transition. Doesn't even try to look for the climb area. So I can use this to now I can jump here, and I can also drop down to here, and it's all through just a simple switch inside of your inputs. Now, one thing you might have noticed is if we go onto the beam here, you're going to notice that when we enter it, we actually are kind of stuck in a direction, right? There's no real turning around. The actor doesn't really turn around. How do we go about fixing that? Well, we can use a simple montage to be able to do exactly that. So if I go into my climbing animations here, go into the transitions for beam, you'll see this balance 180, which is exactly as I had stated, which if I disable the root motion, just so you can actually see it, you'll see that he goes from one to the next direction. So we can use this to actually take the actor and rotate him 180 degrees from where he currently is. So we'll go right click, create the anim montage, push this into montages here. Now, I will say that these these types of actions have a little bit of a different setup, so we're going to do some additional overrides, but it's not that hard to do. So the first thing to note is that we're not actually going to be using any offsets really. We're just going to be using rotation. So if we go ahead and add notify track, right click, notify state, motion warp with offset, and we're going to look at where he starts his jump, which would be right about here. Now from here, we're going to go and look at where he completes his full jump, which I'd say would be right about there. And what we're going to do is under the root motion modifier, we're going to uncheck warp translation. Warp target name is going to be active target. And then under the primary offsets, we're going to go under the orientation, set it to primary target normal. And then under the rotation offset, we're going to set this to 180. So this way it's going to go 180. In other words, directly backwards from where we're actually going. Now we're just going to right click, add notify, reset parkour action. And then we'll set the blend time to 0.2. Under the state control options, make sure that you check the active state. And then under the advanced options, we're going to open this up and you're going to see a couple options that we're going to use here. First one is going to be maintain active state. So what this is going to mean is that if there's any other type found, for example, for beams by default in transitions, if it's in contact, the next type that's going to be is going to be hang. If it's hang, the next type is going to be full contact. So if you want to make it so that way the full contact remains, we just have to make sure that maintain active state is checked. And we also want to maintain current state targets, because this will keep all of our targets the same. Now we can go ahead and save this, and we're going to go back to the transition folder here, or the transition selection table, add another element, and we'll go ahead and plug that animation in that we just set up, the balance 180. Now the action modification here, we're going to pull up under the state match restrictions, target, and active. So because like I said, we're going to be going every time a transition action is going to be taken, especially when you're in beams, it's automatically going to try and switch you from full contact to hang or from hang to full contact. So that means that unlike with the other types, we're not going to be going and saying, okay, we want to be balance beam, full contact to balance beam, full contact, because that's not going to be the condition that's going to be able to be matched. But what we can do is either go for the target is going to be hang, or we can just set both of these to none. So it's entirely up to you, but I like to do it where it's going to look for the actual output type and match it accordingly. But under the input restrictions, I like to use backwards. So this way, if we're moving backwards and we hit like one of the action keys, it'll actually just rotate us to face in that backwards direction. So now if we go ahead and save, minimize, and we go back over to our beam here. Okay, so just really quickly, guys, I noticed that the action wasn't working correctly, and it looks like we are going to want to make sure to set these values to none, not the balance beam hang as the target. So we'll go ahead and save that, minimize, because in certain instances, we won't actually find the target, so we don't actually want to make sure that it's only going to do it if there finds a balance beam hang target. And I also removed the input restriction here, but we can go ahead and put that back. Hit play, and then if I go over to the object here, and then I press the control to modify, I don't even have to press control actually, I can press S in the spacebar, and you can see that now he's facing in the other direction. Now we can walk backwards, forwards, and then go ahead and whoosh, alright, now we're facing this way, and whoosh, alright, now we're facing this way. You know, that doesn't mean that we can't do, you can still do all the same transition actions and things that we were doing before. Now the cool thing is that that type of transition we can use with all with hanging as well as ledge types as well. If I go over to the climbing folder here, transitions, and we look at hang, we can see that we have this hanging 180 animation here, which is pretty much just looking and going to the other side. So what we can do with that is right click, create the anim montage for that. Then we'll open it up, unchecking the enable auto blend out, adding a notify track. And then we're going to right click, add notify state, and then the motion warp with offset. Now we'll look at kind of where he starts the movement. I would say right about from here to here, he's not really doing much except reaching down, but here he's actually going to our target point. So what we're going to do is with this window, go to the root motion modifier. Now for things like this, so if I actually go to the actual montage here, open up the hanging 180 and search for root, and then uncheck root motion. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that he's kind of going from where he is, but he would be going to what would be considered the length of the object, the other side, right? So with that in mind, what we can do is click on the motion warp with offset here, warp target name, and we're going to set this to length because we want him to go to the other side. Now we're going to uncheck ignore z-axes, keeping warp rotation checked, go to the primary offsets, and for this one, we're going to set the orientation use is actually going to be the length normal, because we're going to the other side of the object. Now, we are going to use the state warp overrides, but we're just going to use the length normal this time instead of the height normal, because instead of going up the actor, so if I actually go and hit play here, and we go over and just drop down, you can see that we have a length actor there, but if I climb up, oops, but if I climb up, you can see we have a length actor there as well. So we can use that length and its normal to be able to kind of spin us around to the other side. Now, from here, what we're going to do is we're going to right click, add notify, and reset parkour action, setting the blend time to 0.2. Going into the state control options, we're going to click on active state. Now from here though, we're going to do something that's a little bit of a customized override. So if we click on we see where it says use override target. So if we click on that, then the new target we're going to set as length, and then the use normal, we're going to set to the length normal. So this allows us to be able to define one of our target points other than height to be able to be our new target for climbing, as well as being able to define one of the normals as our target normal. Now, we also want to go into the advanced options, and we want to make sure that maintain active state is checked. Because as I had said before, whenever you enter into a climbing state on beams, it's going to try to put you into the opposite of whatever the substate is. So if you're in full contact or walking, it's going to try to put you into hang. If you're in hang, it's going to try to put you into full contact. But by selecting that one little option, it'll keep you in whatever state you're currently in. So now if we go back to the transition actions here, add another row. And this time we're going to go under action modifications, state match types. We're going to keep the target as none. Active is going to be primary type of balance beam hang. And then for the montage selection, we'll go ahead and just do that 180 for the hanging here. And then under the primary modification, we're just going to leave this one blank, but we are going to make sure to add a compare value. Also just, leaving it blank, I suppose. And then now if we save, play, we go over to, let's say this one, for example, and we drop down, you can see that we are doing the transition whenever I hold the transition button. Now, the reason why it's doing this is because I haven't given it an input to match against, but you can see that we're kind of going up and down. So how do we fix that? Well, if we go into the hanging 180 montage here, under the state warp overrides, for a moment, it's going to, like I said, it goes from hang to full contact or full contact to hang, right? So in this instance, we might actually want to set the offsets manually. So we'll set the forward offset to -10, up offset to -215, or whatever my hanging offsets are, I guess is another way of putting that. And then now with the state warp overrides unchecked, if I hit play, go back over to the climb area here, and then I just drop down, and then I hit the action key with control, you can see now we are just going to the other side. Now you can make this so that way it's a little bit more refined if you wanted to make it so that way this is only going to be selected under a certain condition. So if we open up under our blueprints for the BP third person character, wherever your character blueprint is, we had set up this custom boolean index 0 in one of the other videos for the modifications. But we can actually use this if we wanted to as a trigger for this animation and only this. So if we go into the action modifications, custom bool options, we can set the use action modification bool to true. And this way we'll actually have to be holding and pressing the control button to be able to actually do this action. So where other actions might not need this way you don't have to worry about just the input match blocking the difference between this or this. So on top of being able to do that type of transition on a beam, we can also do something like that on a ledge actor like this. So if I open up the, I have this in my climbing folder under the transitions, I got this ledge turn L. You can see where he's going to kind of jump up and then vault over to the other side. And I can display this better if I just disable the root motion. But you can see there that he kind of just goes up and over to the other side. So this is something very similar where we're kind of just switching sides. So what we can do is right click, create the anim montage, and move this over into the montages folder. Now, we'll go ahead and just double click, open it up, and we'll add in the basic warp functionality. So it's just like what we've been doing before. Under the blend settings, we're going to, our blend options, enable auto blend out on check. And we're also going to make sure to right click, add notify state, and motion warp with offset. Now, what I recommend is you can see here from here to here, the hands don't really move. But from here to here, they kind of rotate and jump down. So what we can actually do is maybe from right about there to about here will be our warp window. Now into the primary settings, we're going to go into the orientation here. We're going to make sure to set this to the length normal, because we're going to be going to the other side. So, right, so we're going to be starting from this area, and then we want to go to the length area, just like how we did with the beam. And then under the root motion modifier here, our warp target name is going to be length. Ignore z-axis uncheck, warp rotation is going to stay checked. And then we're going to right click, add notify, and reset parkour action. Go into the state control options, make sure activate state is true, making sure also to check the override target. Now, just like what we did with the beam one here, we can go to the new target here and set this to the length. And the use normal is going to be the length normal. So this way we can now give it a new direction and a new target start from when we get the end of this action. Now we're going to set the blend time to 0.2. And then under the advanced options here, we're going to make sure that maintain active state is checked. And now we'll just hit save. We can go into the climb transition selection table here, and we'll add a new element. And we'll put that montage that we just created, that ledge turn there. Now with the compare values here, I remember we set up the length. So I'm going to use this between 10 and 50 because I don't want to do this on areas that are more of a kind of a mantle type situation. I only want to do these on more narrower walls. And because we had set up under the montage selector for this one here, right, we had set up the Boolean to be used. So we can actually use that same setup here for this one. So we can go under the action modifications, custom bool modification options, and we can just check the box and we can use that index 0. And then under the input restriction here, you can set this to none or you can set this to forward if you'd like. It's really up to you. I'm going to set this one to forward for mine. Now if we go ahead and hit play near the wall actor here, if I climb up onto it, and then I hold that control option we binded that bool to, and then hit the forward and space key, you can see that he goes on top, but you can see there's a bit of a problem. Just like with the other one that, oh, it looks like we didn't check the state warp overrides. So we're going to go ahead and just make sure that that's set to true. That's my fault. Without that, we actually, he's just going to go into the object just like how we did. But now if I press Control W and space, you can now see he just, he goes above it, which is improper. But I just wanted to show you that the state warp overrides are going to do the same thing they did when we had it on the beam actor. But if I disable this, go into the primary offsets, and just set it to -46, and up offset of -125. And then we'll just save that. And now, if we go ahead and hit play, and do the same thing, you can see now we are doing that nice little swap over. There is a little bit of a jitter there at the end, so we could probably, fine tune this window a little bit, but that's really, when it comes down to it, this is all about just playing around and seeing what feels good. There's really no one way to be able to set the system up, and that's one of the great things about it is that, we can do this vault here, we can do mantles, we can hold the control button and do this instead. We've set up some nice transitions for vaults, beams, and a whole bunch of other things. So you can see here we've got a lot of different options, and this is just kind of like the base level of stuff that I'm showing you guys here. You can take this a lot further just by adding in more animations, more values, more control options, and kind of going crazy for how many different selections you can have. So the last thing that I want to talk about is how to be able to use the disengage from state with animation. So we're going to go into our character blueprint, which for me is third person, blueprints, and then VP third person character. And then we're going to navigate to where our disengage is. So right here, you can see we got the disengage from state. Now we're going to check the use animation. And then if we go over to my climbing animations folder here, we're going to set up the one for ledge. And we'll take a look at this one right here. So you can see he kind of just drops and he kind of rotates, right? Well, let's take a look at that with the root motion so we can take a better idea of how this is going to look. So he's just kind of just dropping off and then rotating around. So what we can do is we can right click, create the anim montage for that. We'll just move that into my folder here to keep everything nice and clean. And then we'll open up the actual montage here. Now, just as with always, we're going to make sure to enable auto blend out uncheck. Add a notify track, but what we're going to do with this is we're actually going to look at where he drops off the area, which I'd say would be right about here. And we're going to right click add notify state, and we're not even going to use motion warping. We're actually going to use the add notify part and just use the reset DPTS movement overrides. Now under the movement mode here, we're just going to set this to falling, and we're going to make sure include restraint is constraint is checked. So whenever you're in a climbing area, there is going to be a plane constraint that's applied to the character, just to make sure that they stay within the actual rotation they're supposed to be moving in. But in this instance, we want to be able to remove the plane constraint entirely. And then I'm going to set the gravity to 1.75. Now from here, we're just going to look at where a good blend out point would be. And I'm just going to do it right about here. Then we'll add notify and then reset parkour action. Blend time of 0.2. And we're not even going to worry about the state control options. So as you can see here, we're not using the motion warping system at all. We're just going in, resetting our movement overrides, and then resetting the system itself entirely. So what we can do with this is just save, go into the climb transitions here. We're going to go and add an element. In the montage selection, we're just going to put that fall down that we just created. Now for the compare values, we can put an element in here, but we'll just leave it blank. And then we'll open up the action modifications, state match restrictions. Now we'll create a target, but we'll leave it blank. And for active, I'm going to set it to be for ledge climb full contact and point climb full contact. Now we're also going to make sure under primary modification here to set this to disengage from state. And then we'll go ahead and save. Go back to our BP third person character, just double checking to make sure that use animation is checked. And now if we go ahead and hit play, and we're just going to go up to a ledge type actor. And now if I press the left alt, you can see he does the drop down animation where he turns all the way back around. So this allows us to be able to use this to reset a lot of different things when it comes to how we can reset the system and its parkour trace. So as you saw before, when we didn't have it set up with the animation, if I go back and just uncheck this, and I climb up on top of the actor over here, right? So if I go up on top of this, now if I press the left alt, you can see he just drops right off. But just by checking this simple boolean, he's now going to use the animation. And just like with all the other actions, you know, you can have one for hanging, you can have one for free climb, you can have one for pretty much anything you want. Now you'll notice that I'm having a bit of a struggle getting the action to trigger. It's because my distances are probably, they need some refinement on my animation selection. But you'll see now, you know, with that checked, if I press Alt, he now does the, drop down turnaround. This is just, one of a variety of ways you can use the animations to be able to disengage from states, to be able to trigger states. And as I've shown, you can use the transition actions and other elements to be able to blend between various states. And one thing to remember too is that while I might not, have demonstrated a certain action type, I want you guys to really think about, this from your own perspective. I don't want you to think about this as a one-to-one tutorial. This is more showing you how the system works and how everything operates, allowing you to maybe get an understanding of how to make it your own. But that's really it for the transition, guys. When it comes down to it, from here you can use all the stuff that I've shown you to be able to create a wide variety of different transitional actions from any of the different states. Now, in the next video, I'm going to be showing you guys how the ledge catch system works. So we're going to be setting up some different ways to be able to attach to ledges from falling states, be able to, vault or mantle over objects when we hit the ledge catch on it. So there's some really cool stuff we can do with that from in-air states, and we're going to be checking out that in the next video. But as I said, that's going to close it out for this one. So I hope to see you guys in that next one. But until then, stay tuned. And as always, stay animated.